our phone's ringing, we're working on a document, especially even in your generation. I'm older than you guys, but they say, I forgot how many interruptions you might have in a single minute because you have, everything's on your computer, social media, this, that, the other thing, you're WhatsApping, you're sending regular texts. So I think that most of our thinking is emotional and most of it's good. But in that very, very small percentage of times, but in very habitual ways, we do not use our analytical brain. And that's when the real behavioral problems begin to manifest themselves. What I built into my model was 16 examples that I thought worked well across industries, across life, across like really just human beings across the globe. And I think that how they manifest differently for all of us. So I think that most people, I always say, amidst the 16 that I have, I think there's only been maybe one time in the 5 years, which even when I was just piloting the model, where people didn't at least choose one. In fact, the crazy thing is before I first went in, I did a big pilot at SocGen in New York, maybe last fall, almost a year ago now. And before then, people were choosing between 4 and 6 of these unconscious behaviors, right? And so I thought that was the average. When I went in to work with those guys, on average, they were between 8 and 10 of 16. I don't know if it's because they were a group that really wants to be better. And so they were, because I tell people in the training that, they say, oh, well, I used to do this, but I don't do it anymore. And I always say, even if you correct for it, pick it, because you're not correcting for it all the time. And those especially emotionally charged situations, that's when you're forgetting about it. And that's where your analytical brain is not, the emotional brain is hijacking that analytical side. I mean, are there certain ones you're most interested in?
Well, I was just, curious because I was going through it myself and I was like, oh, I do this. I was trying to be really honest with myself. I'm like, oh, I do this, I do this, I do this.
Yeah, I have your choices in front of me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I can actually see.
I was being super transparent. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's great. I think that I tell people the more transparent you are, the better results you're going to receive from me. And now, from all of the information we have, because that's really how you're going to make changes, right?
But I was wondering, so most people say they have maybe like 4 behavioral issues, let's say. Okay, but they actually have more than that. What does that tell you about us as human beings, and why do we have like these broken behavioral patterns?
I think the broken behavioral patterns often come from our childhood. I think that if you look at like turn of the century psychologists, they talk a lot about where values come from. There's not a lot of research in the psychology field. Most values research is done in the sociology field. And I built a lot of the foundations of my model based upon a lot of what these sociologists have studied. Or the turn of the century psychologists talk about this. They talk about how when we're young children, probably 2 and under, we don't really have any judgments of the world. We're viewing situations every day. They're coming at us and we're not saying, oh, this is pretty, this is ugly, this is, I don't like that color, I like this color. We're just really taking it in with no judgment, right? Stove is hot, fight or flight, all those kinds of things. But the minute language comes into play, and we start to listen to our parents and we start to understand language, that's when biases and prejudices and some of these unconscious behaviors are born. And that's really the big fight that we have then as we get older. I'm not saying they all come from early childhood or our parents or language, but I think that's the beginnings of many of them. I think that if we have, say you chose the crowd blocker, and that's really an interesting one because that's really, we changed all the names to unconscious bias and rewrote them to really make them sound, well, to be more cheeky, as the English might say, and to not be so negative sounding, because I don't necessarily think they are negative. I think oftentimes people, crowd blocker, you choose it. That's what, like when you have a group of very intelligent people and they can really make a dysfunctional decision. And everyone's so smart and respected on the team that you really think, oh, well, my gut telling me that's not right, but this guy's smarter than I am. So, or this girl's like, she's got 2 more PhDs than I have. And, and so then these dysfunctional decisions are born. Is that because you come from a family where people are more passive and they just agree to disagree and kind of move on and people aren't taking strong stands? Maybe, but I think it does come from all of the situations that kind of are happening in our life. And then I think that we repeat them without even knowing it.
Wow. And it's incredible that you have it all laid out. So right now you have all my information in front of you. You know, all
Yeah.
my values, the top things I care about, and you know, all my behavioral
I
issues.
do. I don't have your I don't have your sorts in front of me. I can have that in front of me because I also just didn't want to be. I didn't want to go into this being too biased, so I didn't even
Mhm.
read them until literally a half an hour ago. And it's funny
Mhm.
because if it's okay with the two of you, because I know that they're
Sure.
obviously it's something that's the greatest thing about this is you can take groups of people either virtually or in conference rooms or now with our AI that we have across the world. And even if you're sitting next to somebody, it's still very personal, right? Because you're doing your own mindfulness journey and you're getting to do this your own deep dive. And really, everyone else is so focused on their own deep dive that no one's that interested in what your tilt is or what their tilt is. Maybe after the fact, but you guys, I can tell maybe that maybe you're drawn to each other because you
Ooh.
both you both have your quadrants. It's funny, you're both very regulated, which is probably why you're accomplished. And I imagine you're doing these podcasts outside of other careers and jobs. I don't know that you
Wow.
have, but
Yeah.
I would assume that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that sometimes that regulation, since it sits opposed from our openness zone, often kind of blocks individuals from maybe seeking out more entertainment and joy. And I mean, they're in a rush. I don't know your ages, but I'm guessing that you guys are probably somewhere in your late
Mid
20s.
20s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mid to late
Mm-hmm.
20s. And I have my oldest daughter's 27, my middle daughter's 24, and my youngest daughter's 22. So they're like in the shit of things, just like you guys. Everyone's trying to like figure out who they are and what they want to do. And a lot of that does come down to value assessment. So yeah, so it's interesting. You guys both are very high in regulation. It looks like, Ali, I talk about people finding their own perfect imbalance because no one individual can be perfectly balanced in each of these quadrants. I mean, if they were, oh, what a perfect world we would live in. I mean,
Right.
super interesting at the beginning of my journey, digressing a little bit. But when I was reading about values research, looked at different values quotes, just inundating myself. My dissertation was on values. So I was like deep into values. And I found a quote from Rosa Parks. And Rosa Parks talked about what a wonderful world would be if we had freedom, equality. I forgot the exact four adjectives she used or values that she used. She called them, I think they were virtues, which are very interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked back a year later, when my model was formed, each one of the values that she mentioned each one was in one quadrant. So she was
Wow.
basically saying what a perfect world it would be if we had all four of these things. So, I mean, none of us are perfect human beings, and it's a journey, and every day is a journey. And I feel like the greatest thing about a tool like this is we can be reminded every day. We can say, oh, am I going towards what matters to me? Am I making a shift? And we have a real-time app that's coming up and lots of tech so people can actually see their tilt, see where they are, and then see where they want to get to, and they can see real-time movement.
I love this thing because I get to really know about myself and get to know
Yeah,
about Saeed, my friend, and my work partner. How cool
it's
that we
so
get to
cool.
know. It's so learning about yourself is so important. I was just wondering, Tia, about so how does this work in the workplace? I'm very authentic. I'm really open and honest. Uh, in the workplace, I can see how employers can use this to be more understanding of their employees and be more accommodating of their
Yep.
needs and know how to reward them and know how to make them feel welcome.
Totally. Wow. I can tell you start Arab just finishing up a master's because
Yeah,
that's exactly true. I mean, what I say
but
to you,
but
go
wait for
ahead.
this one, Tia. But also, I can imagine how people who aren't qualified who don't really understand how to use it will be judgmental. Will
Mm.
use this at a face value and be like, "Oh, this person has so many blockers. Why would I want to
Hire
employ
them
someone?"
or
Yeah.
well, yeah, you're right. I mean, and that very thing can happen. And if I had somebody that I was pitching this product to, I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's such an iterative product that it depends on how you want to use it. I
Mm-hmm.
think that many people, I think there's a lot of industries that could use it to curate talent, meaning at the last phase. I mean, because we all know when you're hiring for a job, by the time you get down to the last five candidates, they all have similar CVs, skills, and everything else that they might have to do on the job can be trained up, right? They're all smart people. They're ready to take on this role. However, do they share your values, the corporate values? I mean, if you use it like that, you're not only giving them a personal gift because they're getting to do this journey before they get hired, but you can actually then look and see where their strongest values sit. and where their blockers are. That would be less judgmental feeling, I think, because it's just a tool that employers can use because they want to utilize it. In the general workplace, if we decide we're going to come in and we're going to do it on a well-being scale, I think it's important to understand that anything that they see would be anonymized. They would be getting to give their employees this tool. And exactly what you said, they're letting their employees know that they care about them and that they know that they have a living life and a working life. And because of how it's been really just personified in this hybrid work world, those worlds really can't be separate anymore. We're one and the same. We are one human. We carry our sufferings. We carry our pain. We try to put it to the side, or like I say, put it on our laps instead of in front of your face like windshield wipers in order to get through the day. But if an employer is telling an employee, I care about you, I know that you might be hurting it sometimes, and I know that every day is not going to be your best day, then that's a great gift to the employee. But also, if the employee knows, okay, they are going to see my results, but they're all going to be anonymous, they're going to be rolled up, and they're going to get to see everyone's basically value tilts, maybe on a heat map per se, and see where people sit with their values, then they become stakeholders, like you said. Then they know, hey, they actually do care about my values. And maybe those extra toasters and treadmills and all the extra things we have in the office isn't what all our employees are needing. Maybe they need an extra day off every 2 months to go climb mountains or visit the synagogue or temple they haven't gone to in years. Who knows? But I think that's a way to answer that question. It's really giving them a gift and knowing that their results are anonymous.
Tia, if you don't mind me interrupting this point.
No.
I'm going to play a bit of the devil's advocate in this
Sure.
situation.
I love that.
Someone's got it, right?
Someone. Listen, I have 3 daughters. They do it every day.
So obviously I see how great this can be for helping people, just like work in a more as a cohesive unit, especially in the workplace or even just as in between each other as a group, between friends. But at the same time, I want to address maybe like the ethical value of it, because of course there always will be some people that maybe would like to manipulate the results that they have taken from their employees and then use it to,
in a not so good way.
Yeah, like obviously their intentions might not be the same as someone who wants to enhance their employees based on pure intentions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that definitely, I think there's always some loopholes for that. I think that my model gets around it a little bit because values are basically, like, for example, you take personality tests, right? And you guys have done them before. Totally. And there's a lot of like social desirability. First upon maybe taking as an employee, like what is my employer? What kind of personality am I supposed to have for this job? And then the personality test tries to get around that because they ask you the same question 6 different times to make sure you're not lying, right? So they try to do that. Values, because they're so personal and because they're fairly neutral in a sense, and also because we're putting them in large categories in a sense by doing this ranking system, I think it would be fairly difficult ethically to use it in a discriminatory way. I'm not saying it can't be done. I mean, listen, humans do terrible things. But I think it would be, and if anything, I think it always kind of works against that, because when I have a current employee we're going to be working with, my largest client, one of the largest U.S. insurance companies. And I think what she would like to use it for, actually in California, is she would like to see some of the demographics of her company. So it's all going to be anonymized. If people choose to say, I'm Black, I'm Hispanic, I'm white, whatever it is, they can decide whether or not they're going to share that information. I think that could actually work to the betterment. Because she can see, what does my Latino Hispanic population look like? What does my Black population look like? What are, like, I think I see more ways where they can flag issues. I guess where if I'm going to be my own devil's advocate, where I'm trying to think where it could maybe they could use it. I guess if they were really concerned with running some kind of creative and marketing company, and they really only were going to hire people that sat heavily in openness and they were basically going to be discriminating against like any person that's highly organized or any person that
Right.
but I don't, that's a really good question to say, but I don't think it can, I think if anything, it's what I'm most proud of my model, because I really feel like it fights against those types of happenings, if that makes
To
sense.
be honest, even the example you gave, I don't think it is actually discriminatory in a sense. It's more of, I mean, a company wants to pick the candidates that fit their profile the best way possible.
Right,
Because at the
right.
same time, if you hire someone who's not a good fit, even though they might be of good merit or have a a wonderful CV, if they're not the good fit for the company,
Then they're not a good
it's
fit.
eventually going to show up. It's going to show up,
Yeah.
over time. So your program actually just cuts to the chase and
It kind of,
removes that mistake.
it kind of does. I mean, I think it does. I wanted it to do that because I was looking for something that really, I don't know, got to the heart of things a little bit without being overly intrusive. To be fair, I think some of those things that could become overly intrusive, if they choose certain values, like if they, to be fair, the values haven't even played out the way I wanted them. For example, sexuality. I mean, to be fair, I thought that there was going to be a lot of people who were maybe in the LGBTQ community
Right.
or had just come out, or I don't know. Maybe I had my own biases with that, but to be fair, a lot of it's just I've seen like if I see people choosing it, it's usually these kind of machismo white males that, and I don't mean that in a critical way, because I feel like good for them that they chose that. And I only know that because these individuals, these couple that have chosen it, have been interviewed because they've done the whole process. And Saeed, you'd be amazed how honest people are with this process. Like even in the questions, because right now there are 5 written questions following the training if the company would like to pay for them or they want to have that kind of deep dive, because then they're really I'm learning, as I call, you probably might remember from Louisa's training, the second P of evaluate practice is we're learning the narrative landscape of your life. I mean, you might choose these different value blockers and you might even tell me that these are your top 8 and these are your final 16, but now I'm going to really learn the story of your life, because now I'm going to ask you some really pointed questions really based upon those blockers and some other kind of broader issues in your life. And I get to learn the crazy thing is before I even had these really pointed questions, I conducted in-person interviews, which was, nightmare writing those reports. Because then I'm like sifting through pages and I did handwritten notes because I didn't want to isolate people and say, oh, can I record you? And it's crazy how honest and how much people are looking for this way to find some happiness in their life. And really the model is all about you,
Sad, you're muted right now. If you were trying to say something. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think at some point in this podcast we're gonna have to flip it around and see how Tia is gonna interview us with all of her notes in front of her.
Yeah, perfect. I love it. I always wanted to be a talk show host in another life. So,
I feel like we're talking to like Oppenheimer right now. You're creating this amazing tool. It's gonna change the world.
I hope so. I really created this. I spent a lot of times. It was kind of a gift in a sense, in a way. It was both a gift and a curse. When I was a child, my mother told me one day before when I was, I think, grade 1, she was like, Tia, God has given you a gift, and people can speak with you and they can talk to you and you make them feel comfortable. So when you see that child in the classroom that doesn't have any friends or looks like they're sad, it's your job. Okay, of course she threw that back in my face when she told me that I didn't spend enough time with the people that mattered in my life. But that's a mother in a way. I said, well, you may be an ambassador for living. So, but I do think what I saw in the world, and then it became magnified during COVID, was just a lot of sadness. And I see that there's a lot of medication. I think I was listening to, was it Dr. Pradeep that you guys were speaking with?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I got, God, what an amazing story that guy is. I mean, wow. But I mean, he talked about that, especially in America. There's a pill for everything. Oh, I can't sleep, I'll take a pill. Oh, wait, I'm a little sad today, I'll take a pill. I mean, we author the pill in our country, in America. So I think that having 3 daughters and then even watching different things, brushes with eating disorders. I have one daughter that's a cancer survivor, another daughter that went through a crazy assault at university. And I thought,
sorry to hear that.
I mean, and it's hard, but I guess it's life, right? I don't know. And I think if we can learn from our sufferings, then and move forward, then that's great. And that's really what I wanted to do. Is I wanted to, without someone taking a pill, I became very attracted to these mindfulness-based models that can get individuals to move forward instead of going back, because we can't really do much with what happened in the past.
I've heard, Tia, that people with trauma, just a bit of trauma in their childhood, end up being like overachievers. Like they end up becoming a bit more successful than others because they have that drive to push.
I believe that, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, I think if I think that you either get lost in your trauma and it defines you, or you learn from it and you say, okay, how am I going to make this better? And I think if you're a parent, I think that's the best tool you can give your child, to say, yeah, it sucks that you're being bullied. And yeah, it sucks that you have, you're losing your hair because you have cancer and going through chemotherapy. However, we don't know. Steve Jobs said this, and I love it. It's kind of exactly what you said. We go through all this crap and these traumas and these sufferings, and we don't know why. Okay. And we don't know, he doesn't, he got fired from the very company he started, and then he got pancreatic cancer and got saved the first time, and then, ended up perishing from it. But he said that oftentimes we don't know why things happen until we're connecting the dots backwards. Yeah. Things have to happen. Right. You don't understand why. But if you push through those traumas and you say, okay, I can make tomorrow better, I think that's where the learning and that's where the self-discovery really can take place.
So how does a parent know what the amount of trauma that they should induce on their child? That would
don't induce trauma on your child.
or you mean letting them endure? You mean like telling them kind of stiff upper lip? I think that this is not anything to do with the model. This is just solely mother. Okay, this is Tia the mother. I think the best thing you can do is, obviously you're going to be their biggest cheerleader. You're going to always advocate for them, because I think to me, if your child is in an unsafe situation, you want to remove them. However, if your child is in a situation where they're solely going to give up because of other people's opinions or judgments, or what have you, not being accepted by the cool kids or the popular kids, I think that's where you really have to empower your child as much as possible. And whether that's through your faith-based family methods, through just having open communication in your family, I don't know, but I think values is certainly at the bottom of most of it. If you kind of can instill those things into small people, they can grow into large people and have some center when we're called back to reflect upon them, like we do with Revaluate 180.
That's quote of the podcast, I would say.
Exactly.
On a similar topic, I was wondering what are your thoughts on work from home versus working versus hybrid. There's so much debate nowadays. Should people go back to the office? Are people better off being at home?
I have some pretty big opinions on that. I think that young people need some time in the office. I think that if you're like a seasoned veteran and you've been working for 15 years, you've had a lot of water cooler moments, as they call it, So I think that you know what you're doing, you know what's expected of you. But I think complete work from home is not the best thing for people. I think that we learn so much just from interfacing in person with our colleagues. Mm-hmm. I think that certainly, we're seeing each other now. We're having a great conversation. We can feel a sort of closeness, like a rapport, but it's not the same. It's still not the same of being able to go to the pub after hours and to, grab a drink or grab a coffee at lunch. I think so much of that is lost. I think hybrid work is definitely something that can be done, but I think it should be hybrid. I think there should be time in the office, and I think there should be time at home. Because I think for young workers, it's hard enough to know what's expected of you, but then you're working at home and you have all the distractions of home, all the trappings of like a refrigerator and a TV and walking the dog whenever you want. Those are all good things. But if you look at the statistics from the pandemic, engagement went really high up, right, at the beginning of the pandemic, but well-being started to slowly trickle down because people did become lonelier and lonelier. I read a case of a guy in LA, and I forgot what company it was. It was sometime during the pandemic, but they'd worked completely remote, and especially because it was the pandemic. And he was young, like 26, 27, and he died. Nobody heard from him for like a week. So finally someone on the hybrid team or the virtual team was like, hey, where's Jack? I don't remember his name. And so they finally started making phone calls. And I don't even know if maybe the parents called in and said, hey, we haven't heard from our son. So finally they called some of the team members and they tried to figure it out. Someone went to the home, and I don't know if he had an allergic reaction, but he was some kind of sudden death that happened to him. I mean, that kind of happens. That seems like an outrageous example, but maybe not. We need to be kind of touching base.
Mm-hmm. Sad, you're muted still, but
Oh, am I?
watch out for that one. Go for it, Said. You were talking about how.
Yeah, sorry. The hybrid model, the reason why I find it interesting is because it creates a certain balance in a way where you can, when you go to the work, when you're on the field, you're having all these interactions with these people, with your coworkers and your colleagues and maybe clients. But then when you get to do remote work, I feel like you get to be by yourself a bit and really concentrate on your thoughts, just like how
Yep,
you're supposed to in general by yourself. So,
that's
and the
true.
remote work
There's
gives you
probably
that
less
opportunity.
interruptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I agree with you. I think there's some combination of the two. I think single-handedly alone, neither is. I mean, I think we've learned that neither is perfect. Though I do think if you can have like a 3-2 work schedule in 3 days, home 2, or vice versa. I mean, I find with my 27-year-old, she's a writer, so she writes novels for. That's ultimately what she wants her obviously career to be. She hasn't secured an agent yet. She's on her second novel, but she of course has a day job and she writes for Net-a-Porter. And I think you're right. I think she does find those work days from home really valuable, where she can have a little bit more like thinking time. And yes, you're answering phone calls, and you're still online in some ways. But I think you're right. I do see that for young people, it seems to be a nice fit to have both.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, and I think it's cool that people who couldn't work before, like people with disabilities and mothers, and people who have to stay at home or can't commute, are now having the opportunity to work, and I think that's a
Yeah,
pretty cool part of it too.
true,
Tia,
true.
you were mentioning how like one of the benefits of working in an office is the socialization aspect and the community aspect of it. Okay, but isn't there a more better way to solve this loneliness epidemic? Maybe your model has something to do with it. I mean, I'm thinking if like now that I've grown older, I'm in LA right now. I've worked with tons of people, and I've made friends. I've lost friends. I have great friends that I'm closer now with more than ever, and I have people that I've met that the more closer I got, the more I realized that we do not get along, and
No, exactly. It's called makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
it makes sense. Okay, so do you think your model in any way can help bridge like-minded folks together and build community?
I think so. I think it really can. I think it depends on, especially if we can get, especially if I get it to the point where I'm actually offering it to individual users and people can really log on to training sessions. And I think it depends on how much people want to share of themselves at that point. Like if they would like to say, just to see, not with names on it, to see what the people that are sharing this space of them going through the training. Probably in the future app, we can do that. We probably could create groups of people. Once we come down to the third P of Revaluate 180, is that's when we actually start to make those what we call catalysts for change. We figure out what values are being blocked. Um, what and we find your lost forgotten values, which is really probably the bread and butter of this model. I think when people find those lost or forgotten values, and then they could maybe have like an interactive journey or some kind of shared space on this app, and sees that other people are trying to activate those same lost or forgotten values, you create a group right away. Maybe it's a group of people that rock climbed when they were young, and they've gotten away from it, and they all chose like you know adventure and excitement, that they were their lost or forgotten values. I think it could be a way to really bring lonely groups of people together. But what I think even at a simpler form than that, not even having to form these groups, I think when people find those lost or forgotten values and they actually begin to seek out those activities that were once important to them that they've forgotten about, that's automatically going to bring new experiences into their life. It's automatically probably going to bring other people, because maybe they're now going to attend a rock climbing class, or they're going to go
Mm-hmm.
back to the synagogue or back to the temple or what have you. But it's going to bring those connections right away, because those are the places when we're activating our values. We're not doing, I mean, those things aren't done single-handedly. There's lots of other people sharing those same values and even those same activation catalysts. They're activating in the same ways that you may be. So I think that almost happens automatically by just finding that lost joy, that lost happiness in your own life. It's funny. My youngest just moved to LA. She's working for Hailey Bieber's skincare line, Rode. Yep. Woo, plug for her. And use some of the products. They seem great. However, I mentioned this in this other podcast I had the other day, and I was speaking to the podcast host, and I talked to her about moving to LA. This is a difficult time. You guys are in your late 20s. She's in her early 20s. Like, who am I? I mean, what do I want to be? Like, am I even going to get this job? Because she's in this like internship role. Now I'm living across the world. My family lives between London and Miami and New York, and London really feels like the most like home to her. And I was like, when you go there, embrace those things, without putting my values model down her throat, because nobody likes that in a family. Is I say to her, do those things, like she's a great tennis player, go play some tennis. I said, go to church. I mean, it wasn't something you'd love doing when you were a teenager. I said, but you know what? You might find some joy in those things. And she did them. And as I was telling Bram, the podcast host who I was talking about, that takes effort. And when we make those little efforts in our life to make those little changes, that's when the joy, that's when those things that are missing come alive again. And that's where new relationships are usually formed.
Wow.
That sounds great.
You're trying to say something?
No.
What do you think about all that?
Well, it's just really cool how this whole thing works out, and I kind of want to see it in practice. So this is, I think, where we can. This is the part where we can give you the chance to show us how it works by doing the segment that we mentioned earlier, where you can ask us questions based on the info that you have in front of us.
Okay. I mean, I can do that. I mean, if I were to look, at your kind of quickly now, you can't hold me to this because I'm just doing like a cursory look. And like I said, I didn't want to be overly biased.
No, it's fine. I think this will not only give us, but also the audience that's watching a summary of what your program is about and some like a brief understanding of what they should expect, if they try this program themselves.
Okay, well, let's look at the highest zones first of both of you. They might. So, is it okay? You guys are okay with sharing this stuff with you? I mean,
you have our consent. Yes.
I mean, I didn't speak. I don't have the qualitative questions in front of me, so it's very, in a sense, it's generic data that it's easily shared. I mean, it's just your percentages. So let's see, Ali, you chose personal empowerment as. No, actually, you chose regulation as your highest zone, with personal empowerment very close behind. So, interestingly enough, you were 26.92% in regulation and 26.28% in personal empowerment. I'm going to tell you that, obviously, I only have a certain breadth of meeting and speaking with people, but people have sorted cards for a long time for me. And I have found a lot of my high-stakes professionals sit in those two categories. And those are right next to each other on the atlas. Can I ask you, what is your... Where do you hail from?
I'm Lebanese,
country?
so me and Said, we were from Lebanon, actually. We grew up in Beirut. Yeah,
so you both grew up in Beirut. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
That's amazing. My godson, and he helps out. He does all the copy for my company. He's half Lebanese. Hasn't been to Lebanon. Wants to go, but has traveled the world because he's a travel writer. So it's like, I can't believe I haven't been there. Yeah, it's super.
Go.
He's got a cool job.
Beautiful.
So,
Lebanese are everywhere, man.
Yeah, they are. Kind of like the Italians.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone, all us Mediterraneans.
Yeah, we want to escape the equator.
Exactly. We all kind of look and act alike, to tell you the truth. But anyways, so you sit heavily in two zones that are next to each other. And interestingly enough, I don't know too much because I can't say I have a huge array of people that I've done from the Middle East, but I've done a lot of Americans, and they seem to sit in neighboring zones. It's not always regulation and personal empowerment. Where I find that a lot of Europeans, this is generally speaking, right? I haven't run these great statistics yet on my model, which I will do once I have more data. They're in zones that compete against each other. So someone might be really strong in personal empowerment, but also a European might be strong in global vision. And that's a lot, because that's automatic tension in their atlas. They're like, what am I giving to the outside world, and what am I giving to myself? Okay. So since you're strong in personal empowerment and regulation, and interestingly, you chose in your highest zone, you chose no blockers. So that's good in a way, because it allows you to get across the axes, I say, because our values compete against each other across the axes. So you didn't choose any blockers there, but you chose two blockers in personal empowerment, getting you into regulation. You chose torrent and helium. Okay, I'm going to give you the definition of those two. We're going to run a little test here. And this is a little bit of what I do in the qualitative questions. So the helium blocker is to stand by or fail to report an injustice or violation of another because you believe someone else will do it. That's a lot like the typical one that people know is bystander. You might say, all right, someone else is going to do it. Do you have an example, like at your home life and your personal life, where you feel like maybe you've done that? That you're willing to share?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like generally I do take more initiative than maybe others, but of course, I definitely have had situations. I live in LA. There's tons of wild stuff happening around.
Yeah.
I can't be defending everybody and looking out for everybody.
Self-preservation is what you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I say these blockers are really interesting, because I always tell them not to feel afraid of them or feel like they're negative, because a lot of times they are playing out in our lives in a positive way. They're preserving certain parts of our personality or of our own ego or just sense of self that are important. So, so in situations like just not putting yourself in crazy situations in LA.
Pretty much.
Do you have a situation at home where you feel like maybe you activate helium with like siblings or parents or anything?
Not really. No, the opposite, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. You say the opposite. Let's see if you chose. I'm going to look at something. No. Okay. What about
going on.
what about the torrent blocker? The torrent is, I'm going to read you the definition, is a tendency to overrate your sense of skill.
Yeah.
So
that comes from personal philosophy. I like to think this is the best podcast on the planet. I like to think I'm the coolest guy on the planet. I like to think, and it's nothing. Of course, I like to be down to earth and humble and all that, and I think all that's important. But I want to be the most humble person on the planet. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And you have to, and you do have to have a level of confidence to be able to do a podcast. I mean, so seriously, that makes sense. Okay, so that's not surprising. The thing is that personal empowerment then sits obviously against global vision. So sometimes if you're overrating your skills, that could rub up against maybe being, I don't know this because we haven't spoken, but what I would say is it prevents you sometimes from being broad-minded, maybe collaborative.
Right.
Not always, but that would be something in the model that would possibly come out. And that could possibly be, like I said, I don't have your sorts in front of me, so I don't know what the particular values where they're prioritized. If I had those in front of me, I could tell you that maybe broad-minded and collaboration, if they happen to have been removed early in your sorts, could be lost or forgotten values. And that maybe is something that you could be focusing on. That's the kind of things that the model will come alive,
Right.
but will tell me mathematically and with precision when I have actually all that in front of me. But generally speaking.
Tia, this sounds a little bit like astrology, but I know this is like based on science and data and values, but that kind of idea of people want to know about themselves and who they are. And
it's kind of funny that you say that, and I don't even take that as I guess that could be offensive, like because this is scientific.
Mean it that way.
No, I don't, I don't take it that way. You know why? Because my husband's a hedge fund, like a portfolio manager, trader, whatever you want to call him, in that world. And when I was coming up with these one pagers, because of course I'm a lawyer by training, so I had these like monstrosities of these reports. They're like, because I have what's called the forest blocker. Sometimes I can't see the forest through the trees, so I get overly attached to certain details, and it can really hang out to dry, right? A report that should have taken me 20 hours, it was taking me 60 hours, because I didn't want to miss anything. I wanted to give this person every bit of myself, but sometimes expedience and having a breadth of the knowledge is better. So, but my husband's like, you need a one-pager. I was like, what? I can't, there's no way I can get this down to one page. What are you talking about? Can't be one page. He's like, it needs to be like a horoscope. And I was like, what? But it's not a horoscope. He goes, no, it's not a horoscope, but it has to give them people that this one pager based upon the analytics and what you're telling me and where your sorts are, the blockers you've chosen. It shows me. So it is kind of like a horoscope. I'm saying I haven't spoken to you, but predictively speaking, based upon what you chose, because everything's standardized. So if you choose a certain blocker, it's always blocking the same 4 values. So I can, and it's also always being supported by the same 4 values in the zone it sits in. So I can with certainty say that if it's a prioritized value, that's a prioritized value pathway. So something that you think is important, but you're not even doing it because it's blocked all the time by this unconscious bias, right? Or look here, you discarded it. in the first and second sort, and it's probably something that you've really left behind based upon what you've told me. So yeah, in a sense, it's horoscope like, and that's funny you said that because I never really ever revealed that because I thought, well, I don't want people to think that it actually is. But I think that's almost a compliment in a way, how you're saying it.
So, in my opinion, I remember having this conversation with a friend in the past where we also we were discussing horoscopes in general, not that we like agree with them. But we were discussing that the people who are behind horoscopes at the current moment are, in our words, obviously, this is just me and him saying, are a bunch of idiots and still have a long way. But the concept of astrology isn't like the study of astrology isn't completely wrong. It's just that the
No.
people who are behind it are failing at it, let's say.
Well, it's
And
too
I feel like,
it's gimmickfied,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And I
Yeah.
feel like your studies actually might be the right path that could, maybe push it to evolve in a better, in a more progressive way, and like finally show us shed some light on like how it's supposed to be done.
Well, it's funny you say that because it's interesting, like one of the, going back to get, like I obviously I'm an American lawyer, did different things in my life, ran different businesses, taught at university, and then went back to school at 50. Okay. Not like scary. I went to City to do this master's in organizational psychology. I was an employment lawyer. And, I was scared that I never went back to school since I hated law school so much. And the idea, so it was super important for me that when I developed something that it was so built in research, right? So, but the idea that it could give somebody that kind of horoscope hope in a sense is,
Right.
I think, the coolest part of it. And I think that's,
Yeah.
I think we're kind of saying the same thing. You don't want it. I don't want it to be a gimmick. I want it to be real. And actually the newest part of the equation will be able to give real movement in percentages. Like basically after you answer the qualitative questions, I can tell you based upon the equation that we've built and now is going to be put into our large language models, how much either in degrees on your atlas or percentages you have to move in order to move your atlas to find, so where you start to get that feeling inside you where you're living with more meaning and purpose. So where the real science comes into it. But I do think you're right, because I do think astrology, you're right. There's a big science around astrology. So what's there is cool, but it's just sad that we all want to believe a lot of it, right? It's like going to tarot card readers, and then you get that card, and you're like, oh yeah, my life's gonna change. But I think you're right, But okay, so I just gave you a little sample of Ali.
Perfect.
So Saeed, let's go to you. I mean, that was just one quadrant, right? Because obviously we can't
Yeah.
go through all of them. So let's go over to Saeed.
Oh no.
You have nope. It's interesting. You're interesting because regulation, the zone of regulation, is your highest zone by more than Ali's. So you tend to be probably very organized and kind of ritualistic, and you probably start your days. Is that fun? Is that true or not true?
I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to become more organized. Like maybe in certain aspects of my life, I'm organized. I guess I have a priorities list and what I'm organized in and what I'm not.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
this is interesting that you say that. I'm going to look at, so since you're so high in regulation, I'm going to look at openness. Okay, so openness, you were 25%. So openness goes directly against regulation. So all those excitement, curiosity, adventure, right? That's opposing those like order, safety, loyalty, all those things that are kind of moderating yourself, right? So you also chose two blockers in the zone of openness. You chose lens and maverick. Let's read those definitions. And they're probably the reason why, even though you've prioritized most of your values in regulation, you probably aren't getting to them because of spending too much time in these unconscious behaviors of lens and maverick. Don't know that. Let's see what the horoscope tells us. Okay. Hopefully I'm not downgrading my model here, guys, but I think, okay. So if we look at lens, okay. So lens, holding an overly optimistic attitude towards an event or situation, neglecting the objective facts. So that oftentimes that's seeing life through your lens. And that's why we chose that cheeky name for it. That you're not saying, okay, this is the real situation. You're just saying, this is, maybe a good word for sometimes maybe using lens to, oftentimes maybe you could, I don't know this, but do you guys use the term Pollyanna? Like a Pollyanna is kind of like, oh, everything's actually fine. It's going to work out fine, but they're really not looking at the real circumstances here. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe when you were in school, you didn't really study. I don't know this, but could have not studied quite enough for an exam. But you're like, I'll be fine. And then you go and it wasn't so fine. That could be
Yeah.
how lens could play out in someone's life. Do you have a
Yeah, I guess.
situation why you chose that?
Um, I not on the top of my head, but like the exam example is pretty good. Like most of the time, if I'm in certain situations, if I'm not prepared, I will try to implement a certain level of improvisation, and I'll be like, it's gonna be fine. So,
Oh, okay. Well, that's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Well, see, that's good. Then it likely is, you know, blocking some of those kind of those tendencies where, like you said, if you're trying to implement more like guardrails and structure into your life,
hmm
then you personally know that you probably need that, but you're struggling because these unconscious behaviors of yours are getting in the way here and there, with lens, with thinking maybe you're not totally prepared for a situation that's coming at you, but you probably could have prepared a little. I don't know this, but you probably
yeah,
could have prepared a little bit more, and you didn't. And so you come in, like you said, you improvise. But if you put more structure in, you probably won't even have to worry so much about that. And that unconscious, that blocked pathway will
yeah,
probably slip away. And I'm not sure, like it could be prioritized values. It could be lost or forgotten. Like I said, unless I had your sorts in front of me. You also chose Maverick. I love Maverick. Because I wanted to name it this Maverick from the beginning. But in the beginning, when I was first coming up with these value blockers that are built on unconscious bias or built from unconscious bias, they were too literal. And that's what I don't like about unconscious bias. I don't know about
Yeah,
you, Ali, but from your course, I find them to be double negatives and oftentimes hard to understand.
exactly.
Yeah, right. And so I didn't want them to be that way. So I wanted them to be user friendly, understandable. So Maverick, acting with excessive independence and free thinking, regardless of rules and planning, often leading to reckless, incorrect outcomes. That's amazing. So your highest in regulation, you're completely blocking yourself off with that one because you're just doing whatever the hell you want in some situations where you know that there's like rule and order that around this. I mean, I don't know.
yeah.
Did you have an example that you'd be willing to share, maybe home or
Of course.
personal or
I
work?
I think this is just like it's always in my life. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, if my parents would like tell me, is like I was always labeled as an arrogant child. I still
Yeah,
I still get called arrogant by my mom specifically. So I would always want to do what I feel is correct
right,
and not what someone else is telling me is correct.
right.
So, and I still do it till now. And most of the time, I guess it's something that you would say is like trusting your instinct.
Yep, like
And
your gut, going with your
yeah,
gut.
trust your gut, exactly. And I feel like lately what I've been trying to do is trying to find a balance between logic and my own instincts.
It's
Because if I just stick to my instincts, obviously I'll become too reckless and I'll just fumble. And
yep.
if I'm too logical all the time, it's just
Well,
there's
it's
no
too then it's
creativity.
too boring. I mean, it's
Exactly.
interesting. In three of the values that you did prioritize in openness were freedom, creativity, and humor. Exactly what you just said. Anything that your mom was telling you was obstructing your freedom. It's super important to you. If it was it
Yeah.
was a prioritized value, and you're creative, you wouldn't be doing this right now with a good friend of yours if you weren't
Yeah.
creative. You guys weren't willing to like delve deep into people's inner thoughts and learn about why they do the things they do. You have to be creative, and you chose humor. So I think that's
Yeah.
great. So I think that the humor saves you from all of it because you probably are willing to laugh at yourself and situations and realize, oh yeah, okay, maybe my mom was right here. So I mean,
100%.
I mean, it's hard, right? Because this is where it does seem horoscopy because I don't really get I don't get your narrative landscape, just a little bit we're talking about now.
hmm
So that's looking at those two quadrants view. I mean, we can go into the other quadrants if you guys want to talk more about that. You tell me.
Of course. I mean, for now, till now, all of the points that you've made about for me personally have been accurate. So the
That's
program has
cool.
has worked out for me, I would say, till now.
That's cool. I mean, I can, let's look at, we'll do one more on each of yours. How's that? We'll just go to
Yeah,
the
let's
other
do
side.
it.
Let's go to the other side. Okay, Ali. So we looked at personal empowerment okay, so we looked a little bit more at global vision versus personal empowerment. Let's, let's look at your regulation versus openness because it's pretty darn close. So that to
Wow.
me, when you have two zones like that, so your regulation is 26.92%. And the values that you prioritize in that zone in regulation were two of them were being responsibility and mindful, which is interesting. So that's obviously important to you, and that's why you're almost at 27%. You have a strong sense of duty combined with but you definitely combine an empathetic approach, because you had highlighted kindness as one of your most important values in Global Vision. So that's nice, because you're going at kind of these very structured duties and putting these guardrails in your life. But I think you must be looking at the needs of others while you're doing it. So that's really important. But you have an almost equally strong zone and openness at 25 point. This would be your report, Ali, by the way, when you have a lot of almost these very negligible differences in quadrants. It's sometimes I find to be the most difficult reports to write, because oftentimes there's a sense of paralysis in people's atlases, because
Right.
they kind of, which is, you have an equal distribution around your atlas of both blockers and prioritized values. But I think sometimes it could make it hard to just choose which ones to activate in certain situations.
Right.
So in openness, you chose your most important values as freedom and creativity. So two of ones that Saeed chose. That makes sense that you guys are sitting here together.
We were meant to be together. Yeah.
But you chose all four blockers in that zone. You chose Lens, Maverick, Halo, and Hawk. Okay, so that means that even though percentage-wise you're pretty equal to regulation, you chose no blockers in regulation, right? So you could actually get across the zone into openness, but the problem is that getting across into an empty zone of blockers is almost impossible for you, because you're so tethered to that zone. We say when you choose, blockers sit in a zone because the values in that zone define them, right? So for example, Maverick, we heard the definition of Maverick, right? Acting kind of, just independently, often with, not always the right outcomes because of it. Hawk I have that one, is sometimes you're seeing connections where none exist. I think if you remember it all from Daniel Kahneman's work, Hawk would, I'm not sure what they call it in the unconscious bias world, but he talks about writing banana and vomit on a chalkboard, and banana and vomit really have nothing to do with each other, but people will draw a connection. Oh my God, if I eat a banana, I'm going to vomit, right? Because that's what our mind does. It makes these connections. So you have the Hawk, so you're making sometimes connections where none exist. And then you chose Lens, obviously seeing through the lens you want to see them, not always the objective facts. And Halo. So Halo's an interesting one, because Halo blocker is usually people around you that might, if you're a manager in an office, you might choose to promote somebody that you really like, because they're interesting and they're fun and they make it a better place to work. But they might not be actually as good a performer as the person in the office that nobody likes. So that can sometimes be dysfunctional. So basically what this is telling me right now is that even though those zones are kind of equal, you can't get out of the zone of openness, because you're tethered to it by those blockers. Those blockers are keeping you firmly implanted. So you would have to really, really, really come up with, you can get across the axis though, because, there's nothing, tethering you to that zone, because that zone doesn't have blockers. But getting across, you're going to have to really come up with some really good catalysts for change, getting around some of those behaviors. Let's see. What will happen here is they'll create blind spots. It'll influence a tendency to challenge norms without necessary reasoning. It actually, in some ways, is as much as you want to be open, so open that these choosing all four could actually stifle some of your open-mindedness, if that makes sense. I don't know. Are you tend to be an adventurous, curious? Do you spend a lot of time doing the things like that?
Yeah, I'm definitely super adventurous and curious and creative, I would say. But I do hear about all these blockers, and I guess it's a bit more chaotic.
Well, it just might prevent you from getting to those guardrails, to being more regulated. So even though you're pretty high in the zone of regulation, you might not really get into that zone or get to those values as much as maybe you want to, because you're so into doing these adventurous, creative, exciting things. And not only are you so interested in them, but you're strongly tethered to them because of these blockers that you chose. I don't know that, but I mean, what I would say if I was speaking to you after you answered all the qualitative questions and I listened to your examples, is it would be interesting to think of situations in your life, whether or not, because sometimes when people, and even though you don't sit overly heavy in this